everybody, and welcome back. So we are starting a new chapter, and so this is going to be part one, and this is the blood vessels. Basics. We're not going to cover everything, but we're going to cover some stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, the general anatomy of blood vessels that we're going to worry about are going to be in these three categories. Like these two are the big ones. And generally, what you'll see for arteries is you'll see like red, right? And then what you'll see for veins is generally blue. And then capillaries are kind of interesting. So they're where veins, that's an N. I'm sorry, poor things. And arteries like meet up, and it's kind of this like I gotta make sure I put all the letters in there. Exchange point within the body, right? And so this is going to be usually in the tissues. We're going to pull up arteries going to push out, oxygenated blood. So there's also going to be plasma that's going to be fresh, and maybe it has nutrients, or maybe it has, whatever kinds of chemical cellular signaling messages in it, all that fresh stuff incoming. And then what'll happen is the capillaries will also soak up from the interstitial fluid and, just like other situations with different tissue interfaces, but they'll soak up. No, sorry, everyone. um, all this interstitial fluid, right? So this is kind of like the used up. This will have waste in it. This will have metabolic leftovers and some CO2 and all that. And then also just straight up the blood that's been deoxygenated, like the red blood cells. And so that'll go back into the veins, get dumped into the veins. Also, lymphatic system dumps in. Lymphatic system will dump into the veins as well. Okay, so that's the fast and dirty. So, if you're probably going to see this. You're definitely going to see this if you're taking the lab. And heck, you're seeing it right now in the lecture. So what this is this is like a bundle, right? This is the bundle. And so this like bundle feature is going to always there's this thing. So like nerves, which usually are in yellow. So let me like put on a yellow for you. It has to be, here we go. So here's like, the nerve bundle here. And then the nerve bundle is easy because it's the only one that doesn't have a lumen or an internal part, right? And so the vein itself is going to be this part here. Like, see how it's kind of, I should probably get a different blue. Let me grab a different blue. Oh, let's do highlighter blue. Okay, right here on the lumen, right? So that's the interior component. And it's kind of collapsed. It's a little bit floppy, right? And so let's see if I can, I don't know if you can see this really well. Hopefully you can. But what happens here is this is like this stretchy, it looks kind of ziggy-zaggy, and it's because that way when the veins need to expand, they can, okay? And due to pressure, they will expand, and that's generally how they hold their structure, right? There's not a lot of muscle in there, although there is. And then this like last component is the artery. Okay, so like the artery, let me switch to red. So here's, it's inner component, the lumen. And inside, you'll also see like this like really big like muscle layer, right? And then here's that elastic layer, so it is able to bend and stretch and all that good stuff. But that's just, one of the components of what we call the tunica system. So there's this like idea for the tunica system, right? So let's go over here. Okay. Tunica. Okay, so tunic means like basically shirt, like layer, like a tunic, right? Those of you who might know what that is. And so there's an inner one, there's like an outer one, or like a middle one actually, and then there's the outer one, right? And so the inner one is where you would have your most intimate, or it's like the closest layer. So this is intima, right? The middle layer, it's like media, or like in the middle, right? And then the outer layer is external, right? So it's the externa. Okay, so those are the tunica layers. You can see they're labeled here. Here's tunica externa, boop, tunica media, boop, right here in the middle, and then, ooh, let's see here, tunica interna, right here on the middle part. And so that's going to be how it is for all the blood vessels, right? And so again, like the intima is like the inner lining. And then the media usually is like a little broad, honestly. It's kind of like a whole zone in the middle. And then external would be that outer layer. Okay. All right. So more about the vessel walls, because the vessel walls are really important because they do things. They do things like they expand and they contract, and sometimes they have muscles in them, so that can change the blood pressure. They have these real, especially, well, really, the veins themselves have valves. Like, what? Valves? Veins? Right? Which are incredibly important to maintaining blood pressure, and like, we'll get to that in a bit. But anyway, let's do this. We talked about the idea of the layers, the tunic system, right? The tunica interna, media, and externa. We talked about the tunica intima. And so that's important because it has this like endothelium and it feels like plasticky, right? It's really smooth so that blood can just like flow right over it, right? So it won't absorb into the rest of the vessel. And it's relatively thin and sort of permeable. Like sometimes, depending on if you're dealing with like a sinusoid capillary, they're going to be really permeable. But if you're dealing with an artery, like a major artery or a major vein, they're not going to be too permeable. They won't have too many fenestrations or at all. And then also when we talk about selectively permeable, the permeability changes to something that's chemical in this case, right? And so we're dealing with tiny things like ions or, like small molecules. So that's what that is. And very specific things can be let in or out, and that's selective. It's a squamous epithelium. And so like little cells, remember they look like the fried eggs. They just like get, sometimes they shed and they float away and they deal with the resistance in the blood flow. So, right. So because of that plastic layer, it's repelling the blood cells and platelets. It prevents clotting, right? It doesn't give them anything to grab into. The only time that they really can, the clots, remember, they're going to need fibers sticking out, right? So something to grab onto. And if you have that smooth plasticky layer, like none of that's available. So it's only going to be during injury that we can turn on those clots in that way. When tissue around the vessel is inflamed, produce cell adhesion molecules. And what that does is it allows white blood cells, remember like lucid cells, right, sites, to start congregating in that area so they know like that's. So the vessel wall, as we've been looking at, has the layers. And so I just wanted to go into some of the parts of the layers a little bit more. So um, tunica media is going to be the middle layer. So this is the one we're looking at for smooth muscle. And this is real telltale on the arteries. They have a big one. This is where a lot of the, especially collagen and elastic tissue, so structural stuff, it's a thick layer, right? A lot of the elastic tissue, remember, it looks kind of like this. It's bunched up, and that's so we can pull and stretch a little bit. Um, Especially if we're talking about vessels that can be rebuilt. So this can make your artery stronger. This can give you stronger veins because this is where a lot of those changes would happen. Say if you started to work out, for example. And then, of course, especially in arteries, we're looking at uh, the reason they have so much smooth muscle is so it can control the blood vessel diameter, and that's going to help you do things like control blood pressure or control bleeds, right? All that good stuff. Okay. So the tunica externa is going to be the outside part. And for the most part, this is going to be protective layers. It's going to anchor the vessel in. Some of it's actually also going to be where we have intersection with things like lymphatic vessels and nerves. Um, so that's kind of interesting, but there's also the vasa vasorum, and these are super small vessels, super tiny ones that they give blood supply out to parts of the larger vessels because there's all of that muscle. Remember? Sorry, that's terrible. I can't even tell what that is. All right, and so here's a look a little bit more closely. So here is the heart, and then arteries on this side and veins on this side, and we talked about that intersecting lattice at the capillaries. And so let's look at some of these different types of arteries. So we have, and blood and veins also, we have the large size right here. For arteries, we call them the conducting vessels, okay? Um, then we have distributing arteries, which are the medium-sized vessels. So these are medium-sized veins. And then we get down to this, like the venules and the arterioles. And so those are like the smaller ones, like right before we get into the capillary area. And so taking a look closely at the larger artery, so notice we have all of these like intima uh, media, for example. And so they have like, here's the elastic layer, here's a muscular layer all through here, right? Here's these little nerves. Here is vasa vasorum. So that's going in, and that's actually feeding, remember, all that muscle, because remember, the lumen, even though it's conducting blood, it's like the heart. So it has that plasticky layer. Oops, sorry, P. Plasticky layer. And so none of the blood can actually go into the vessel. So that's why we have to have those. Um, let's go ahead and see if I can just pull right over to the large vein. So again, the same concept here. So the lumen is nice and plasticky, so it just slip slides through. And so we have to leave it up to the vasa vasorum right here to actually feed the muscle layers and the internal layers of the blood vessel itself. And those are always kind of bundled with these nerves. Tunica externa, right? So this is anchoring. It's kind of giving mediation to the nerves and vasovasorium. Tunica media itself, it's like smaller muscle layer for sure, really much smaller, and it's going to have a lot more flexibility. Like veins, actually, when you look at them, they like are in dissection, they're collapsed, right? They kind of fold on themselves. And then you have arteries, which have the super thick, um, like tunica media, and so they're very, rigid and structured. Okay. The part that I kind of want to get to now has to do with these suckers right here. These are so cool. These are valves, just like, heart valves, but they're inside of the veins. And they help as blood gets like kind of pushed up and through here through pressure. These little doors of the um, blood valve actually will snap shut and like add kind of like, it's kind of like an elevator and like a lock system, like the Panama Canal, if you will, of blood transport. Because remember, we have to go usually from places that are kind of far away and down, and we're fighting gravity all the way up to the heart, right? So we're going to use the system in order to do it. The more you exercise, the more you work out, the more you increase your blood pressure in a healthy way, the more actual valves you can put in there, and it kind of helps your blood pressure stabilize. It helps your blood um, avoid things like clots or, in some cases, varicose veins. So it's just kind of a nice thing, which is different from these medium arteries for sure. There are no valves whatsoever. These are muscular, and so they're going to be using that force that they've already got coming out from aorta, coupled with the muscle itself for the most part. So same thing, we have intima here, and then we have elastic lamina as you're looking at, and this elastic lamina is going to allow for like changes in diameter, right, of the blood vessel. It's that stretchability, extensibility factor. And then finally, when we get down to these smaller vessels here, the arterioles and the venules, we're not seeing the valves really here. We're not seeing them all the arterioles. We still are seeing a muscly layer. It's essentially a small, less flexible for blood pressure, kind of like local blood pressure changes for sure, but enough of a force push to be able to get it all the way down into the capillary beds, and like kind of it pushes in the blood. And when that happens, a lot of the blood plasma, the watery part of blood actually gets flushed into the tissues, and it pushes the old plasma, which now has waste in it, back up into the category or capillaries that are going to be dumping into the venules. And so that's like kind of this interesting pressure that happens there. Not exclusively, it's like not all of it. Some of it ends up back in the lymphatic system. But that's kind of what I wanted to cover for this basics video. And so I hope that was super helpful. And I hope you're out there having a wonderful day. Bye bye.